Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure coming back to Yogyakarta, which is my hometown. Currently meeting all my, thank you, Prof. Haryo, lovely teacher. Meeting again all my teachers here and friends, of course. What I'd like to share today is what we've been doing in Malaysia for the last several years with regards to ethical guidelines and development of informed consent templates for human genomic research. So Malaysia joins the ranks of developing nations in terms of human genomic research, in that the government funding is available, not much, enough to start as a seed funding for the researchers to start their study on human genomic science, but not enough for a sufficiently big-scale study to draw a good conclusion, a strong conclusion. So they have to share data with worldwide researchers. Then this when the problems start arising, and when the realization came to us that we have to start up with ethical guidelines and informed consent templates for this. Next slide, please. Right. Okay. A little bit of history background. We actually have the guidelines on medical genetics and genetic services, which was issued by the Malaysian Medical Council. It was in 2006. This is to guide doctors, medical doctors, when they have their patients. But they have, it has a few touches on the research, but no provision, definitely no provision for genome-wide data acquisition. Right. 6 years later, in University Science Malaysia, the research office of the university asked us to obtain international recognition in ethics review process from FERCAP, the Forum for Ethics Review Committee of the Asia and the Western Pacific. Included in that is that genomic has been included as one of the niche areas where we have to work on. In August 2012, the first draft of the ethics guidelines and the informed consent template was formulated. Right. This template was modeled from those in the US, the National Human Genome Research Institute in the United States. 2 years later, USM obtained its recognition from FERCAP. It is in fact the first university to have recognition from FERCAP in Malaysia. About a few months after that, ethics review committees in Malaysia, they gathered together to make the first national ethics review committee, national network of the ethics review committee in Malaysia, taken place in Kuala Lumpur. That's where our documents, ethics review guidelines, and also the informed consent template was discussed, were presented and discussed. A few months after that, second meeting of the nursing took place, and our guidelines now is being taken up for national considerations, for national guidelines. It was published in 2015 in November. Next slide. This is just a screenshot of the publications that we obtained from this work, which was published last year in November. Right. Thank you. Next slide. Right. Next. Next. Of course, informed consent form is unique for each study. That's the baseline philosophy that we do every time we do this review on this. There are elements of informed consent form, topics of research and everything. We all have known that. Next. Right. Scope of consent. For genetics and genomic study, we would like it to be balanced between not too loose, like you can do anything under the sun, or not too strict, so that you have to every time go back to the ethics committee to amend your research. Like you cannot be too specific about mentioning what kind of methodology you are doing, while you are not able to actually make yourself sure that you will get the data from that methodology. You have to have give yourself some room for changes in terms of methodology. Next. This is tricky. Consider the level of knowledge of the participants, especially in genetics and genomic science. I don't think the current, I have to admit that I don't think the current template that we have sufficiently address this. We really have to go into that. Like the words DNA, how DNA is inherited, how DNA have contributed to a disease, all those kind of things. We really have to re-look again on that, so that participants have sufficient knowledge to think about whether or not to participate in this kind of research. Next. Yeah, one ethical clearance for one study that is clear for our policy, and the possibility of reconsent. So now you are taking a DNA which can be used not only for the current research but may be kept for many years, and then that can be used for subsequent researches, for subsequent studies. So then the same researchers can use that for different studies, or even that can possibly be shared with other researchers that might need, that will raise the possibility that researchers need to have reconsent to go back to the participants. It's not always the case. The ethics committee basically have to reconsider that, look again whether a reconsent is ethical, possible, practical for that particular study. Right. Next. All right. This is the earlier part of the informed consent that we developed, the template. First, of course, we have to state the purpose of the study, explain the objective, brief and easy to understand. This is, as I mentioned, but a bit tricky. And then explain the study procedures. Need to specify the type of tissue taken. Like, for example, if you are doing research on cancer, and then you are taking the tissue, that has to be stated, because that has implications in terms of inheritance. That will be different when you are taking the blood, for example, which could be germline, inherited, or shared with other family members. Next. Risks. Yeah. Next. Physical risks are usually minimal, different with like clinical trials, which involving huge physical risk possibility, but psychological or social risks associated with possible loss of privacy. This is one of our main concerns in this kind of research. Next. This could be major, mainly regarding private and confidential information. How private information will be protected. Next. And then we also mentioned limitations in terms of the data may be leaked. Somebody may trace the family because of the data shared, inter-database comparison, computer security breach. All these limitations we are mentioning that in the informed consent form. Next. Right. This is another one which is also a bit unique for genetic and genomic research. Next. There are two options of statements that researchers can choose, whether they would like to disclose or return their results, genetic results from the research itself, or they don't want to do that. Right. Do the results fulfill requirements for disclosure? Like if we are studying whether somebody is having diabetes or not, that's probably sufficient to look at the glucose level or the fasting plasma glucose level, right? But with genetics, if you are looking at one particular genetic variations, changes in nucleotides, that's not necessarily cause somebody to have a disease, right? And that will trigger more of an anxiety rather than benefit to the participants. So that's, we are putting up requirements whether certain genetic results can be returned to the participants. Next. Right. So we are asking researchers to really have a look at this genetic wheel. We are asking them about the analytic validity of the methodology they are using, whether the methodology they are using really tells what it is supposed to tell. And then we are also asking the clinical validity of the test, whether the results they obtain can really rule out or confirm the positivity of the disorder. And then we are also asking researchers to consider about the clinical utility of the information they obtain from the genetic data. So what? After you have all this diagnosis, so what for the patients? Is there management for that? Is there preventive measures for preventing the disease to occur, and so on? Next. So basically, we ask researchers to consider these points when they decide to disclose or not to disclose. Next. The methodology has to have established analytic validity, and then the associated risk of the genetic variants should be at least 2. Should be twice the risk. And then it has important health implications, and then the availability of therapeutic and preventive interventions, or that the genetic variations will carry significant reproductive risk to the offspring. And then the process of disclosure, we also put emphasis that it cannot be just delivered to the participants, but it has to undergo certain procedures. Next. This has to be started from the moment informed consent is taken, and then when it has to be delivered, state and explain options during consent taking by qualified personnel. Results should be returned by qualified personnel in the context of genetic counseling. So it has to be done by proper personnel. And then if it's necessary, referral to medical and psychosocial care should be available because of that information. Next. Right, incidental findings. Incidental findings, you are taking basically, if you are doing a genomic study using a genomic technology, you are basically scanning the whole thing in your DNA. While your objective of study is usually restricted to a certain field of medicine. Like, for example, I'm taking a blood and DNA of somebody and trying to look at the genetic variations contributing to diabetes. So my objective of study is restricted to diabetes, but I'm scanning everything in the participant's DNA. So possibility is very high that you might encounter something which is beyond the objective of the study. Right? For example, breast cancer or the other kind of cancer with very high possibility from that genetic variation. So this is what we call incidental findings. In here, we ask, we also put clauses on that. When we ask them if they want to be recontacted, if we incidentally find findings of this nature. Next. And then we should also respect participants' right not to know. They don't want to know about that. Next. 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 This is another one. Is a bit tricky. Significant non-health related incidental findings. Non-health related. Sometimes you have to take trials, father, mother, and probants, and possibility is there that you might find possibility that incompatible genotypes between the 3 of them, raising suspicion that there is a non-paternity issue there. So we are putting up this clause. Later on, this is highly debated, really, this part. It's probably the weakest part of the informed consent, I would have to admit. We continue to discuss about that. I'm going to mention to you we have one case recently about this, of a study recruiting trials and how we try to circumvent this issue, which I'm going to describe later. Next. Public data release. We asked we ask researchers to explain if they are planning to share the data with national or international database. And then we also ask them to explain to the participants about the implications of sharing the data with withdrawal. Because if the data has been shared with the database, then withdrawal cannot be done anymore. But that should not be a problem, because then if we share the data, it should not be identifiable information that we share. Next. Storage and withdrawal. We asked them about sample and data storage and withdrawal from the study. Withdrawal in genomic study means that they can ask the researchers to withdraw, and the consequence for the researchers will be that they have to destroy the samples or the specimens with them, and then to destroy as much as possible the data that they have obtained. So in this case, the data that has been published or the data that has been submitted to a database cannot be withdrawn. Next. Right, so this is the part that I'd like to share also. There are two recent cases with regards to the consent of genomic studies. One is, I'm not sure if we can label this as community consent. This publication was done in 2015 in Kuala Lumpur, studying using genomic technologies among indigenous people in Malaysia, in Peninsular Malaysia. They call it orang asli. So there are complications because in terms of level of knowledge and so on and so forth. What they did was that they did prior consultation to community elders first, where they explained their research, and then they did field visit to the place where the orang asli live, and explain the study en masse together. And then after the explanation, those interested to participate are to approach the research personnel. And then individual signature was obtained on consent document. So individual signature was still obtained, although explanation was done en masse. Right. Next, and then, not next, sorry, remain this slide. Family consent and circumventing incidental findings of non-paternity. So this is another study which was recently approved by the Ethics Committee in USM as well as in the Ministry of Health. There is a study who is going to do whole exome sequencing to a family trials, father, mother, and the proband. So therefore, we have issue of the possibility of incidental findings of non-paternity. There are two issues. One is that we are taking family consent. We are taking individual consent. So prior discussion with the mother, we first approach the mother. That's how we try to circumvent the possibility of incidental findings. So first we approach the mother, explain to the mother about the nature of the study, including this possibility of incidental findings of non-paternity. If the mother was okay with that, then we approach the rest of the family member. If the mother is not okay with that, so we stop there. Right, with that, we try to circumvent the situation. And then the next is that family discussion. After the mother agree, then we approach the family members. The family discussion conducted by the research personnel. And then subsequently, an adult member of the family signed on behalf of the family members which were recruited. Right. That's two of recent informed consent cases that we are handling in the USN. Right. Next, I think that's all my sharing today. Thank you very much for your attention. Matur nuwun. Thank you. Terima kasih.
Okay, so the next is the Panokju. He is here.